When I first started to walk with the Lord about 60 years ago now, I wanted to preach as He called me to do, but I didn't know anything about the Bible, so I read a text in the Bible that said, "Don't worry about what you're going to say because I'll give you what you should speak." Well, I found out later that was supposed to be for one group of people at one time in history, but I've used that with the Lord ever since, and I have never prepared sermons. Usually on Friday or sometime later in the week that I'm going to preach, I start getting some thoughts of what I should say. And so last week, when I was talking to you about where I had made a mistake trying to make a deal with God, you may remember, and I mentioned something that had come to my mind about the Ashanti king who had given me a gold mine, and it was a great gold mine, except God wasn't in the project, and so it failed. So the Lord told me, this week, I want you to share, not only introduce the people to who the Ashanti king is, but what the work has been doing in that part of the world over the years. And it seemed appropriate because we don't have too many mission stories anymore. And although these events happened some years past, they're still relevant to what's going on today, as I will explain. So I'm going to show you some slides, if this thing is going to work. There. In 1990, I got a call from Matthew Bediako, who was from Ghana. He and I had worked together in Ghana. He was then the vice president of the General Conference, and he says, the Ashanti is having his 25th anniversary celebration in a couple of months. Do you want to go with me and attend it? And I said, absolutely. So we've wound up together in Ghana, in Kumasi. This is the sports stadium. I hope you can see that pretty well. Maybe we need to kill a few lights, I'm not sure. Can you see it all right, or not too well? Let's see if we can take some lights off the stage here and it'll show up better. Is it possible to do that? That's showing a bit better. This was a sports stadium in Kumasi where they play football, they call it, but we call it soccer. It's made to hold about 100,000 people. But on the morning of his celebration, they started to fill up early. It was about 8 o'clock when I took this picture, and there was already about 20,000 people just milling around, and all the umbrellas are the booths of all the chiefs of the different areas. And so it was fairly cool at 8 in the morning. It was only about 90. And it would warm up later at about 105, which is pretty normal for that time of the year. And so here's a close-up of one of the paramount chiefs, as they call it. He is a chief of the chiefs of a certain area. That's he and his wife. And the people behind them, you'll notice a kind of a stand there with a insignia on it, which is the insignia of his region. All the people were there in their pomp and circumstance and glory. Oops, let me back up. I hit it twice. Not going to go back? Well, I had a shot of the stadium as it was filling up. There was 250,000 people there at the time of the program. There we go. So, as you can see, it's just packed full of people. And after all the celebrations and the military jets flew overhead and everything went on, and President Rawlins gave a short speech. He's the president of Ghana. Then it was time to meet the Ashanti. And so that's Pastor Bediako and I. We were privileged to be the first, after the president of Ghana, the first to greet the Ashanti. And he's sitting there in all of his regal glory. Look at the area where the front of my suit is, and you see kind of a goldish colored piece of furniture. That's one half of the stool he's sitting on, and it goes across his body and up the other side. It takes 4 men to carry that stool. It's 385 pounds of solid gold. As you know, Ghana used to be called the Gold Coast, and there's lots and lots of gold there. The Ashanti mine in the days when I was there was producing about 300,000 ounces of gold a year. So there he is sitting in his regalia, and if you look at his right hand, I'm shaking his hand, but he's got his hand in his lap. The reason is he can't lift it, because all of the golden horn and all the golden bracelets, which all are different symbols of his kingdom, they weigh so much that he can't lift his arm. When he sits down and they put it on, he just sits like that until they come and take it off. And so we greeted him, and that was the end of a great day. Then, a few days later, Pastor Bidiako and I and some of the officials from the Ghana conference, we went to the palace and we met the Ashanti. Now, it's a funny thing because if you're a Ghanaian and you come to talk to the Ashanti, you can't talk to him directly. You talk to his spokesman, you tell him what you want to say, sentence by sentence, and then he turns to the king and he repeats what you said. Not that the Ashanti is hard of hearing, that's just the way it is. Nobody could speak directly to him, except me, because I'm not a Ghanaian. So I was speaking directly to him, and we were talking, and I thought that was quite humorous that I could talk to him, and I'm not even a Ghanaian, but the Ghanaians couldn't talk to him at all. They had to go through a spokesman. This is one of the things of the court. So what Pastor Bidiako and I did, he dreamed it up actually, we gave the Ashanti a life-size portrait of himself, which he just went crazy over. He thought that was the best gift he got from the whole deal. And we were happy that he enjoyed it. And we showed him the picture, and he came and walked over to the picture and thanked me for giving it to him. And as you can see, the picture is at least the same size he is, or a little bigger. And so that was who the Ashanti was. He's passed away now, and his son is the king. But a great man. He went to all the best colleges in London, and a very, very humble man. And he told me a story once. He said, you know, in the ages past, according to our storytelling, some people came to our country and they told us that we should worship the true God because they worship the trees and the hills, nature. And they said we should worship the true God, and there's a special day of worship that you should come and worship him. And that's the Sabbath. So I asked him, I said, well, could that be back in the days of King Solomon? Because he had people going all over the world gathering things for him. He says, probably so. But we know that when the Sunday-keeping people went to Ghana and started churches, they had success, but very little success. When the Sabbath-keeping people came to Ghana, we were highly welcomed because we were telling them to go to church on the correct day. So that was the story of the Ashanti and the people of Kumasi. Now, the next few slides I'm going to show you is a church that we built in Kumasi. Kumasi is the second largest city in Ghana. There is about 2 million people there at that time, probably many more now. But we only had 5 churches, but the work was starting to grow. So we decided to build a church at a little township in Kumasi called Bantama. And so here's how you build a church in Africa. You don't call the local sand and gravel company and order 50 truckloads of cement. You mix it by hand. We brought cement down from Europe by boat. We gathered the rocks. We had a crusher and crushed the rocks. And here's some of the ladies of the church. They're putting the rocks in head pans, and they're carrying the rocks on their head over to where we're going to start to pour the floor. And there's the floor being poured. And also notice there's some columns going up. And there's the sand in front that we mix with the gravel and the cement. And we pour the floor and we hand trowel it. And it's all hard work, believe me. This wood that we're using to make the forms is called wah-wah. It's a very hard wood, very strong, and withstands the pressures of the cement. So there we are forming the girders, and on the side, on the left now you can see them. On the right, we've already poured that section. That section of that long girder on top of the wall is going to be the main floor of the church. This is the basement of the church we're building here now. And lots of people came to help. You'll notice somebody standing about just to the right center of the picture. We call those people shinies because they're white and it's easy to see them from the black people. That's me. And I'm standing there waiting for a head pan of cement mix so we can pour it down inside the forms. And I don't know, altogether we probably had 300 people there that day working. And a very busy place, as you can see. This young man has a head pan of cement. That probably weighs about 100 pounds. He's got it on his head and he's going up the ladder to hand it to somebody. And that's how we built the church. The pillars went up. Now you see a building just behind that. That's a school that we were also building at the same time on the same property. And there's the church with the main floor on, and all the trusses are hand welded out of steel. We made them out of steel. When we started this church, the membership of Bantama was about 500 people, not counting the children. We probably had about 1,000 children. But we decided when we drew up the plans, we would build it for 1,500 people, and that should last a while. So we continued building it, and that's how it looked. Then here's a picture when the roof was on, and the roof was just corrugated fiber sheeting. There's the first meeting we had in the church before it was even finished. And there was 3 choirs that sang, one on the right, one on the left, and one in the center. You can't see them in this picture, but they were all singing in a different dialect. Not at the same time, of course. But it was a high celebration. And there's the picture of the outside of the church with the roof on and the front. Later we put a steeple in the front of it. And now there's the church finished inside. That was a picture we took about 8 o'clock in the morning when they were just people starting to come in. Pastor Isaac will appreciate this because it's probably the same in Egypt, but in Africa, at least in West Africa where I've been, when you go to church on the Sabbath, it's an all-day thing. You don't go to church and look at your watch. Is it 12 o'clock yet? I'm hungry. The first time I preached there, I preached for about 40 minutes because having been with the Voice of Prophecy, we had a time that we finished on time. And they said, oh, no, that's not enough preaching. You have to preach another sermon. And so a normal Sabbath sermon time is about 2.5 hours. And that puts some pastors to the test. Have you got enough to talk about for 2.5 hours? It was difficult for me in the beginning, but and then after that, they bring some food from wherever they have it, from the home, and they share. Not like we do in the gymnasium. We didn't have a gymnasium. We just sat out on the grass. And many of the people, they'd have a bowl of rice and either fufu or palava sauce or something. Palava sauce is made out of leaves, and it's like spinach almost. And they boil it up and they put it on the tubers that they dig up out of the ground, which is similar to a potato. And so it would all be there, and most of the people were just eating with their fingers, because that's what God gave us fingers for. So we would sit and have lunch, and then we'd come back in the church, and they would have a couple hours of singing, and then we would have an evening service. And that's how the Sabbath was spent, and still is how it's spent. This sign on the right, Otumfu Opoku Wari II, Ashantahini, laid the foundation stone. This is the foundation stone he laid because the church was already built. And he was assisted by Neil Wilson, who was the president of the General Conference. He came over to Ghana to dedicate the church, not because of me, but because of Pastor Bediako, who was his good friend. And Pastor Bediako was born and raised in Kumasi from a very poor family. Very, very wonderful man. It was my privilege to know him and work with him for so many years. And so they came and they had a celebration. I've got a whole other bunch of pictures about Neil Wilson dedicating the church. That's for another time. But that's how a church was built. And here is the people that were there at the time the church was built and dedicated, about 550 people. But by 2 years from the taking of this picture, the membership was 1,600. And we had to start building another church. So the work has grown tremendously in Ghana. This is a picture of, I went to hold meetings there, and this was a tent. Actually, I brought it from the States. It seats about 600 or 700 people. But there were people all around, and by the time the meeting started, there were people on all the porches, on all the buildings around it, and you notice there was a big loudspeaker there. They would broadcast it as loud as possible so they could hear it for a couple of miles, I think. And there were people standing in the streets and all over the place. We had probably about 2,000 people at each of the services we had. There's a picture of the inside of the tent. And this was the afternoon meeting. Then also because there were so many people we couldn't accommodate them all, we would have a second meeting in the evening. And when I was preaching, I had an interpreter who was so marvelous. He was also a Shanti young man, but he spoke about 3 or 4 different dialects. And he was about 3 words behind me. That's all. I didn't have to stop while he said what I said and then start again and stop and start. I would just speak, and he was translating, running right behind me about 3 words. He was a marvelous translator. It made it so easy to work with him. And this is one of the baptismal classes we had that I don't know how many people we baptized, but quite a few at those meetings. And so this is how the work goes. When I was there, like I say, we had 6 churches, counting Bantama. And as of last year, which is the latest report I got when I was back in Africa, I had met a man who kept statistics, and he told me that now in Kumasi we have 93 churches. And it's growing like wildfire. The problem that we have with the churches is that we've got lots of people, but they have no way to get around. They have very hard times. Turn with me now to the book of Matthew. If we can put the lights back up, if you would, gentlemen. Thank you. The book of Matthew, chapter 9, and verse 37 and 38. Matthew chapter 9, verse 37 and 38. If you don't have your Bible, there's one in the pew in front of you. Jesus is speaking, and we should all have this to memory. He says to his disciples, "The harvest truly is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest." Well, at the time of Jesus, nobody knew who he was except in the area he was in. And so he needed laborers. He said to spread the word from, the great gospel commission, Matthew 28, 19 and 20. "Go, therefore, to all the world and preach the gospel." Now turn with me quickly to Revelation chapter 14 and verse 14. And it's another event about reaping and harvesting. Revelation 14 and 14. And I'm going to read verse 15 also. Revelation 14:14 says, "And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and on the cloud sat one like the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him who sat on the cloud, 'Thrust in your sickle and reap, for the time has come for you to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe.'" So Jesus said when he was here the first time, the fields are white to harvest, but no laborers. And he was talking about people who wanted to join his movement. And now at the end of time, he's coming in the clouds of heaven, and he's reaping the harvest of what has happened during that time period. So between his first coming and his second coming, we have the time of planting the seed and growing the crops. And that's what we're doing when we go out and we mail out for Bible studies, and then we go out and we encourage people to take the Bible studies. We're getting ready to harvest the crop. And so that's what we need to do in this church, to make it grow, to make it prosper, to let people know that there is a God who has a set time for everything, and a time for his coming, which is soon. This is what we're doing around the world. We're growing faster everywhere except America than any denomination that's out there. Well, I was thinking yesterday when they're going to have this recount. They just can't get their arms around Donald Trump. So they're going to have a recall to see if maybe they can dream up some votes that he really didn't win. How long did it take this lady to raise $5 million? About 1 day. But how much money would they spend to further God's work? You see, that's why Jesus said it's easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. Because most generally, riches in the hands of people means selfishness. Incidentally, there is a gate in the wall called the Needle's Eye where camels, if somebody came after dark, they had to bring their camel through the gate one at a time on their knees, so that would preclude anyone ambushing someone and taking over the city at night when they had the gates closed. And so you could get through the eye of a needle, but it was very, very difficult. And so it is for the rich man to go to heaven. We have some rich people. I can't even remember his name now, but we had an Adventist, and I'm sure he's passed along now, but he had patents on cement trucks, on how the cement trucks work. And he was very, very wealthy. One time he gave us $5 million to put roofs on churches and build churches. And so he put his money to good use. But that was because he had an enlightened mind by the Lord. I think of people like Pastor Cody Francis, who started an organization out of Puyallup called Mission Projects International some years ago. Maybe you've heard of him. He goes out and he has people who are helping him financially, and they've got workers. They go to any country, whether it's South America or Africa or Philippines, different countries, and they pick the worst locations where our church has not moved forward, and they go out to those locations, and that's where they preach the gospel, and they're doing it with great success. You see, I remember young men when I was there who were on fire for God. And in those days, we had mission offerings. We talked about missions in the church a great deal. When I came home on furlough, I'd go to camp meetings like Auburn, different places, and tell stories about mission work. But I want to tell you about this one young man that I met. I can't, of course, remember. I remember his first name was Elias. But he would get up every morning at 5 o'clock and go to the bus station in Kumasi. And he would board the bus that went down to Accra. They had a bus that went to Accra and came back every day. So he got on the bus and always took the front seat. He knew the driver very well, took the front seat, and the bus would fill up and head for Accra, and he would stand up and preach. And he would preach off and on all the way to Accra, 6 hours. Then the bus would be there for an hour while it reloaded. People wanted to go back to Kumasi, and he'd come back and preach again all the way back to Kumasi. He did that 6 days a week. He was having a hard time even getting money to keep paying for the bus because he was trying to work nights and do that in the days, and it was hard for him to do. So finally, they gave him a stipend of $40 a month plus his bus fare, and then they gave him another $40 for money to leave with his wife so that the family would have some food. And that's what he did. Baptized hundreds of people through his work. Another young boy who was in Bekwai, a neighboring city, I had heard about him, but I hadn't met him and for about 2 years. So finally I got a chance to meet him at a Pathfinders camporee. And here he was. He was going to deliver a message to all the Pathfinders. And it was... I think I was scheduled to preach on Sabbath, and he was preaching on Friday, so I wanted to hear him preach, so I didn't even know what to expect. And this little boy gets up on the pulpit. He couldn't see over the pulpit hardly, so he stood over here on the side. He was 12 years old, and he'd been preaching for 2 years. I marveled at his message. It was a powerful message about how young people need to serve God while they're young and be used to it and get into the habit of realizing that God is them. And when God is love in your heart, then you can do all kinds of things. I turned to the then conference president and I said, how successful is this boy? He said, we've had over 1,000 baptisms in 2 years. And he was 12. You see, God wants to finish this work. But what is the problem? The problem is that this country was the country God blessed to start the work around the world. The Adventist church started in this country from the Methodists, the Baptists, the Presbyterians, and during the William Miller's time. And yet we have become a country of non-believers and a country of, how should I put it nicely, people who want all the advantages, but they don't want to pay anything to get that. I saw yesterday they were talking, the day after Thanksgiving, they were talking about how much food is thrown away. Not in the nation, in the state of Washington. Only in the state of Washington. In 2015, and this is according to the people who collect this information from the garbage companies and various things, they want to know, for landfills to build in the future. In 2015, the people of the state of Washington only threw away 37,800 tons of edible food. Can you believe that? And that's food that anybody in 90% of the world would run a mile just to get a bite. And we throw it in the garbage can. I see food when we have a fellowship lunch, somebody took a bite, didn't like it, threw it in the garbage. We need to wake up. The work is being finished. The question is, are we helping to finish it? Every soul in the Bible study coupons is a soul that God wants in His kingdom. But do we care enough to bother to go out and deliver a couple of lessons? I hope we do. I hope that we have a change of heart. This church, this conference, this denomination, so that all of our efforts are put to save souls, because Jesus is coming, and whether we help with the work or not, it's going to be finished. It's our privilege to help with it. As I say, this is not a sermon that I prepared, because I didn't even know what I was going to tell you until I stood up here. But God is speaking to us, and I'm the first one that grabs a CD after it's over to see what I've said, so I can really ingest it. Don't you want to go home to be with the Lord? That song last week, Migrating Birds, that to me is, I want to be one of those birds flying to paradise. I don't know how my wings will look, but we know that there's going to be wings. What a time. What a time we live in. Time of plenty for us. We're all caught up in Black Friday and this and that and the other. So many people, not even a morsel of food on Thanksgiving. I pray that God will touch your hearts this morning, and that you'll make it a point to say, I want to be part of that team that finishes the work. May God bless you this morning.